Hey, welcome everyone. This is the Granite Mountain Movie Club. I am your host. I go by Granite. This is a show where we talk about movies, and we do it from the perspective of very cool guys. Everyone here is a very cool guy. We don't allow libtards to join the show generally. Maybe in the future we might have a libtard here or there, but no libtards. That's the main rule. Today we got a returning guest, Degree Studies. He's been here. You guys all know him. How you doing, Degree Studies?
I'm pretty good. Thank you for having me once again.
Anything cool to promote? Anything you up to?
Yeah, there's my podcast, my book podcast, the 2 Minute Hate Book Club. It only comes out like once a month, but we just released an episode on 85 Days in Slavyansk, and my guest was Mr. Polemical, and some people may know that's the book about the first Donbass war that was translated by Twitter great Peter Nemitz. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, check out the 2 Minute Hate Book Club.
Here's the thing about that is that doesn't sound interesting to me, but I listened and it was interesting. So
okay, well,
there you go. That's an endorsement right there. And it's also, I mean, you're downplaying, or not downplaying it, but it's a very funny episode because you and Polemical have this like antagonistic thing back and forth. It's very funny.
Yes, that is true. That is another thing that might appeal to some sickos out there.
Yeah. And then we have a first time guest. We've got Max Teller here, and Max has got a little project, WBS Apparel. Max, tell the people about your project.
Yes. Hey, everybody. I'm Max Teller, Chief Marketing Officer at WBS Apparel. We are the Hugo Boss of the next regime. We help podcasters and other public figures monetize and make them merch and get them high-quality merch to their customers and their fans. So check us out at wbsapparel.com. Follow us on X. Let us know if you need to be merchandiser.
Yeah, and I've seen some of your merch. So I know you guys. Maybe the first one you guys started out with Good Old Boys, maybe, and we've had Bog on the show, friend of the pod, Bog Beef and Good Old Boys. Who else are you working with? What kind of apparel can people get if they go to your site?
Very cool, very legal apparel. We have the newest edition is the 1911 It's the Law in Kennesaw shirts with the Good Old Boys partnership. We have some patches coming in for them soon. We have Dan Baltic's works. We also
nice.
have made the Odo Wikis shirts for them. So 70% of all proceeds of their sales go straight to the Odo Wiki. We have a lot of other exciting new partnerships coming up that I'm not at liberty to discuss. But we also have Axios Fitness is one of our partners, and we made some pretty badass fanny packs for JD, so check those out.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and if anyone wants to join the Nut Army after you've read Nutcranker, go buy. You've read the book, no, buy the apparel. Yeah, and the stuff seems cool. I think you guys also have those glasses from that movie trailer. What kind of American are you glasses?
Yes, I hope to come back on the show if we can go over the Civil War movie when we're able to review that. So
yeah, let's see what happens when that movie comes out. Well, welcome to the show, Max. So today we are talking about Training Day, which I probably should have said up front, but we're talking about Training Day from, I think, 2001, Training Day. And this is a pretty cool movie. Tell me, I'd like to hear from you guys what your kind of first experience in relationship to this movie is. First experience with and relationship to, yeah.
Yeah, I would say I watched this movie first years ago when it first came out, and it was definitely like it was definitely a bit of a red pill at the time, and it was like just seeing how brazen corruption and that could go deeply into the police force and everything. And looking back on it, rewatching it just a couple of days ago, leaves me, with similar feelings, but also like a more personal part of it for me because I used to be a police officer myself near Washington, D.C. for 8 years. So I haven't seen that level of intensity in my career, but definitely some things that hit home in that regard.
Yeah, and through the course of this episode, maybe you can touch on some of the things that are more or less accurate, or just compared to some of your experience. I'm looking forward to that. Degree studies. When did you first see this, and what's your relationship to it?
So it came out in 2001, right? Is that the year?
Yeah, like a week after 9/11, or not, like a month after 9/11.
Okay, so yeah, so I would have been in high school, so I'm pretty sure I did not see it in theaters, but that I saw it before I went off to college. And I think my impression of it as a young man was like, oh, this is a cool badass movie, but I didn't have any like context of adult life to connect with. And I think I've watched it a few times as an adult. And it resonates with me a lot more now, for a lot of reasons. I guess the main thing I wanted to say about it, and I was curious to hear Max talk about this a little bit, is like, as Max alluded to, the sort of corruption and violence that Ethan Hawke's character is immediately exposed to is very severe, and yet there is, I think, a universal experience of starting a job and the first thing that happens being the person showing you how fucked up it is and how different it is from what you thought, and maybe how a lot of the ideas you're bringing to it aren't appropriate at all. So it's like a very funny, it feels weird to call this a workplace movie, but I did, especially in the first third where Denzel is just talking to him in the car, thinking about like, things bosses have told me, or sort of like weird revelations I had in the first week on the job. So I think it's like simultaneously, the thing that sort of stays with me about it is it's simultaneously like a great action and crime movie, but also sort of like a very weird workplace movie.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to get into. I was going to ask you guys about your own like first days on the job, at whatever job. I mean, I had a first day on a job. Well, a first kind of like year basically, but like I worked at a big corporate job, and the guy though that was assigned to be like my first direct manager was he's definitely like an insane guy. And if I ever get, like doxxed or something, I hope he finds this, and I want him to know that he's an insane guy. I kind of like him, but he's totally. I like him, and some aspects of it were good, but for the most part, it was pretty awful. Yeah, and he was just like, it was first day. I really had no idea. Didn't know anyone. He loved to ask questions that I could not possibly know the answer to, and then just be like, "Well, you've got a lot of catching up to do," and stuff like that. I just, I wanted to like fight him all the time. But anyway, I mean, that's the closest I got. I didn't have anyone quite like Alonzo, played by Denzel Washington.
My first, I don't remember exactly my first day on the police. They do put you with a field training officer, and I think they knew I was very green coming into it. I was 22 years old, and they put me with a narc that came back to patrol, and he was a really good cop, but he kind of had that kind of scary, crazy edge to him, like Alonzo did, for sure. So a little bit of similar experience there.
And did you feel like, did things he teach you or told you, were they like mostly like useful, like real wisdom, or would he sometimes say things and you'd be like, oh, that seems maybe a little like too extreme or closer to the line that I want to go, or something?
Yeah, I mean, narcs pretty much universally play pretty fast and loose with the rules. So you kind of like, a good officer takes parts from each FTO he has and kind of formulates himself around what aspects he liked best about each one. So he obviously kind of taught me how to look for things, and that's what stayed with me the whole time I did the
What's
job.
what's an FTO?
Field training officer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they
And
essentially pair you with somebody when you come in for, months at a time and see how you do, and kind of, they're kind of guiding you along because there's a million different things to learn, obviously. But yeah, and
okay.
then they eventually cut you loose when they think you're ready.
So this guy Alonzo in the movie, they're narcs, right?
Yeah, yeah. So there's
So
like a few different levels of it. So, and obviously each department is different. This is LAPD, a big department. So they have patrol. They'll probably have like a mid-tier units that are kind of plain clothes that keep an eye on people and still do a lot of like low-level enforcement, like hand-to-hand drug transactions. And then you have higher tier units like pictured in Training Day that are like quote-unquote elite. Like, they are totally undercover. They can't show their face. They have certain protections different than other officers and everything. So they're trying to depict a more upper tier unit in this movie.
the guy that trained you, so you said he'd been doing narc work. Had he been like undercover like in the movie, or was he more?
He did both. He did all different aspects of it. And he was one of those cops that you would meet and you'd be like, this guy's a cop, kind of thing. And that actually makes some of the best cops, because the line between cop and criminal can be pretty thin a lot of times. But the only way to convince, narcotics users that you're not a cop is to be closer to them in mannerisms.
A thing this movie made me think of is, I don't know if you guys remember this story, but a year or 2 years ago in New York, they disbanded the plainclothes police unit in the NYPD, and like it was supposedly the most effective unit for getting guns off the street, I think they said. But whenever they showed pictures of this unit making arrests, it would just be like 3 Dominican guys in Yankees fitted caps arresting 3 Dominican guys in Yankees fitted caps. And you'd be like, okay, they're obviously part of why they're effective is their plainclothes, but I'm just saying like the demographics of the plainclothes unit looked much more general New York than like normal uniformed officers. So it seemed like that's what Alonzo always made me think of. Like, a cop that looks and carries himself like a criminal.
Well, that's something I was wondering in the movie. Like, why would they, like, these guys? On one hand, they're like trying to be undercover, but it's like if a black guy and a white guy are driving around, like they don't look like a natural pairing, right?
No.
Like they don't look like they would actually be would you? What's going on there?
You remember the scene where he pulls up the Snoop Dogg in the wheelchair? I forgot.
Yeah, and he's like, I would like one crack, please.
And then he says, "Fuck you, rookie," because he wasn't born yesterday, so it looks suspicious. And they always choose. You're not supposed to discriminate this and that, but units like that choose people based on how they look, because for our listeners that can't see me, I look like a pretty standard white guy. So policing certain neighborhoods, even if I'm driving in a Caprice, is not going to go well. It's just not going to work.
Yeah. So is that like, would you say it's like an oversight of the movie though, to even like, it just doesn't seem like Ethan Hawke would even be
I would say if he, if things didn't go so bad the first day and he stayed on the unit, he probably would have been able to blend in better. If he took more to the junkie look, he probably would have been able to pull that off. But I'd say just riding around with.
I also thought, I don't know if I filled in the blanks, granted, but I sort of thought the long-term plan wasn't for him to be like Alonzo's partner driving her. It was like he had to prove to Alonzo, and he even has this speech where he's like, only today you have to prove your heart to me. I didn't know if that was just meant like, if you disappoint me, you're fired, or like, you'll roll with me today, and if you pass, then you're in the unit and you'll do something else. So I guess
Oh yeah.
maybe I'm doing work on behalf of the movie, but I didn't think it was like a long-term pairing. I thought it was
No,
just,
I think you're right. I think you're right. Like those other guys, like Dr. Dre and stuff, who come to the house to help him steal that money. Like those are his other train, because he says I have like 5 people that report to me. It's like those guys. So I guess most of the time they're out on their own.
right.
And like Alonzo says, like everyone here knows kind of who I am. And they're all scared of me, and that's like good. That's the way it's supposed to be.
So it's essentially a temporary assignment is what it's called when they're kind of trying out for a unit, and they have that for different units. And I've done a couple of those, and it's kind of like they're trying to figure out if you're competent, if you're going to fit in, if they like you, which is the most important thing, to them. So those are all just kind of like things to observe during those kind of things, and they can last, weeks, months, depending. But
did you ever have a black partner?
yeah, I've had black and Latino partners.
Did they bestow upon you the moniker of my N? Were you that?
Yeah. Without saying who. Yeah, there was I'm pretty cool for a white guy, so yeah.
That must be so cool. And then you like, everyone, like every white liberal, that's like their dream to be some black guy, like to be on N-word terms with a black guy.
Well, I one of my beats was this like 90% black neighborhood for a couple years. And this one guy was like, I had interactions enough with them where the best compliment I ever received in my life, he said, "You're black to me." You're chill, you're cool. Like, all right. Cool.
Granted, do you know the clip of where Jordan Peterson's talking about the Jewish guys calling him rabbi and he just starts crying?
Yeah. Did you get a pass? Were you allowed to say it back to them?
No, that's not gonna happen.
Okay. Maybe if you'd been there longer, could have done it.
Maybe.
Well, I kind of jumped over this, but like, what do you guys? I kind of asked you about like when you saw the movie, but what's kind of like your review of the movie? Do you think? I mean, I'll go first. I think it's very, very good. I think the first hour is some of the most gripping, like the most engaging, compelling movie making. Like it's just like I'm totally in. I want to see what these guys get up to. Like there's something big coming. Like you can tell Alonzo's. You can tell. I mean, I feel like you can tell very early on he's bad, right? There's something wrong with him. You think maybe there's like a twist coming where he is actually good or something, but he's putting on this act or whatever to test his trainee. But I don't know. I think even the first time I saw it, I felt like he was always bad. But yeah, the beginning is just really awesome. The first hour. I think the end, the last like 20 minutes are a little bit kind of rushed and kind of dumb about how things conclude. Like,
Yeah.
Like Alonzo seems on top of everything until that end. He's just sort of like very haphazard about the final pieces of the plan that he says he's been putting together for a week. So, but anyway, otherwise, I mean, I think it's awesome. I think it's a great like crime movie. I think it's a great cop movie. I like ghetto hood movies and stuff. I think it's good at all those things.
I think it's definitely one of the best cop movies ever made, for sure. There was, and anybody speaking from experience, where if the movie was about their former career or current career, they'd probably scoff at certain things. I found myself scoffing at certain things, but it all those little errors and little plot holes or whatever really just the characters just shine through. I mean, you're with Alonzo, it's like he makes you feel uncomfortable. This is, I think, the 5th time I watched this movie. I still felt uncomfortable, like watching him and how comfortable Washington was in the role of like, it's kind of that feeling of like, you almost have to have a little bit of evil in you to like play that role so well. And Hawk does a good job. He seems maybe a little bit too naive at times in his acting, like playing the greenhorn a little bit too hard. But I think
Yeah, like
I think he more shines in the end, where an Alonzo kind of falls off, and Hawk's acting was good towards the end, in my opinion. So
yeah, it's a little funny. He's sort of like he's like, what? Like LAPD officers are corrupt? Some of these guys are corrupt. I never could have imagined that.
Well, yeah, I think I'll give my review in a sec. I did find myself thinking two things in terms of sort of like story arc. Like one, I think they should show more earlier that Ethan Hawke's just sort of strategizing about how to get out of this, cuz like we know from his character that like he's not cool with any of this. And so the question comes up like, why is he still in the car? Like, why isn't he calling someone? And I guess it's sort of implied like at some point he figures out that Alonzo is so crazy that like, extricating yourself might involve getting killed. But I think the script could have gone a little farther to be like, I don't know, maybe there's a scene where Hawk's gonna like call his supervisor, but then he finds out like Alonzo's last trainee like died or something. I don't know what it would be, but just to show us like, why isn't this Dudley Do-Right like actually walking away? I think that's left a little unsaid, though it's
yeah,
fine. And then the other thing sorry, go ahead.
I think the biggest like oversight of the movie was the fact that he supposedly smokes the dude with the shotgun, and then they like go back to their shift. And of course, like it's called Training Day, like the whole story has to be accomplished in a day. But it's like, there are just, state, local law to like of how that situation is handled after, you discharge a firearm and kill someone. So they're like, okay.
Oh, so if you kill a retired cop on your first day, you don't go right back out on the street 20 minutes later? Is that what you're telling me, Matt?
Yeah, that's the only point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, but the other scene that kind of didn't sit right with me on this viewing was like the honorable cholos who like
Yeah.
don't want to kill him because he stopped a rape. It's like, you hate cops. Alonzo paid you to kill this guy, and like you find out the cop was doing like a normal cop thing, stopping a crime. I mean, maybe the implication there too, I actually think a thing the movie does well, and maybe this is implied here, is like everyone kind of secretly hates Alonzo. So it's like, right-wing people use the term preference cascade a lot,
Right.
but it's like at the apartment complex when they see he's sort of wounded, there's like a preference cascade that's like, no, actually, fuck this guy. And maybe that's what's going on with the Latin gangbangers as well. But that sort of didn't, that like unsuspended my disbelief or whatever. But I think in general, it's a great movie. And I was saying to you guys on our little text thread, like, I just think the acting is so good. Because like I was looking through Antoine Fuqua's filmography, and like I do think he makes good, like high-paced, like cool-looking action that I'm never bored by. But this movie is like several standards of deviation better than other stuff he does. Like I even like the Equalizer movies, which have Denzel too, but like this is so much better. And I think it's just the two main performances. Like I think like Washington is really incredible, and I think the way Washington and Hawk play off one another is really, really good. I mean, so the guy who wrote the script is sort of interesting, and his other movies, we can talk about that. I think I don't want to like take credit away from the writer, but like some of the lines are so good and stuff. I feel like there must have been Denzel or other actors adding like some verisimilitude or, adding some flourishes. Cause like the other stuff this guy has written is just, it's pretty good, but it's not like, we were talking a little bit about, End of Watch. And like, I don't think if you listen to like the dialogue of like the Latin gangbangers in End of Watch, like it seems like a a white guy wrote it. Like it's a little
Yeah.
bit it's a touch off and enters like the uncanny valley or whatever. But this movie is like pitch perfect. So I don't know if
I know they involved like gang members on set, like as extras and stuff like that. I don't know if they were like using them as consultants to like, hey, you know, what would be the the right gang way to say this?
Yeah, how do you kill somebody in the bathtub? Do you stick the shotgun in their mouth? You know, is that how it goes down?
As for like the performances, I mean, it's perfect for Denzel, who likes to go over the top, and he gets to be this like larger than life cop who doesn't follow any rules and stuff. And I was just listening to some podcast. It was funny, actually. It was I always listen to like random podcasts about the movie I'm about to review, and it was a podcast done by like four black dudes, and they kind of review the whole movie from a racial angle, and they're like entertainment industry guys, I guess. And they were saying that like, oh, I know a guy who knows Denzel, and he was saying like there was concerns when Training Day came out because it's like Denzel is making black people look like criminals, and he's doing it so well, and that's kind of bad for the cause of black people, I guess. And someone pointed out that like, or they're like, why did they give Denzel all these lines that make him look like such like a stereotypical black guy? And this person who knows Denzel is just like, that's like how he is. Like that's where he's from. That's the way he behaves. Like before he like, you know, made $1 million and got refined. Like that's how he talked and behaved before.
Well, that's interesting. But the movie did make me think like Denzel should play more complete psychos, because I think sometimes Denzel is obviously a good actor, but sometimes he's playing like a slightly normal human being. And Denzel's approach is always like, I'm going to make this guy the coolest motherfucker in the world. And like, sometimes it's just not appropriate for like, I don't know, like a high school football coach or like a colonel in the army or whatever he's playing. But like in this part, like, because you were saying like he likes to play big. And I guess what I'm saying is like, sometimes that doesn't feel appropriate for the role. And in this one, it's like perfect. Like all his best over the top skills are like put to their best.
Yeah. What did you think of Roman J. Israel Esquire? I've never actually seen it. I'm just looking at a list right now. But I remember that one coming out, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I
noticed a lot of cool stuff with the cinematography done, and there was definitely similarities with his other films. But even in the opening scene when Hawk is kind of waking up, the alarm clock, a blue shadow is cast across him, insinuating, oh, he's real police, you know, he won't be corrupted, kind of thing. And then later in the movie, you kind of see more shadows cast over his face when he's kind of like snaps towards the end, where he's like, okay, I'm not going to play by the rules anymore. You can see Alonzo had Alonzo had shadows cast on him in a lot of scenes where he's like more darker, you know. And the close-ups, the use of close-ups in the movie is really good. It was like really, and how he was kind of looking at him in the car, sizing him up, which at first you're like, he's sizing him up because he's trying out, it's Training Day, but after watching the movie, you're like, oh, he's sizing him up because he's like, can I set this guy up? You know?
Yeah. A lot of the movie takes place in a car. And they make good. It's a good car movie. It's a good like two guys arguing in a car all day movie. But you mentioned that like first scene with the shadows and stuff. I didn't really notice that, but there's a close up I did notice, which I thought was funny. We got a nursing baby early in the movie. So this I guess is like a natalist movie. We get a nursing baby and his wife. She's got like. Did you see like the Catholic candles and stuff? I don't know what was going on there. I don't know if there was something. It was like a shrine to her living husband. I don't know if that's normal, but
no, non-standard.
Yeah,
yeah. And then the next, like when she gets dressed after she's nursing, what's that shirt she's wearing? She's wearing a football. It's like a picture of a football with that. I don't know how you say that brand, but like NYC or it's spelled out, but. Do you guys know anything about that? I thought that was funny.
I couldn't tell from the vibes if they're if they're trying to make Ethan Hawke's wife be Latin or if she's
Yeah.
just a white lady. But there's like I couldn't even you're spelling some of it out, but I couldn't even put my finger on it in that first scene. I was like, is Ethan Hawke's wife like a light-skinned Mexican? But I didn't come to any.
She's probably second generation, third generation, and then Alonzo's mistress is definitely, first generation
Yeah.
Latina.
The wife is the shirt she's wearing is a brand that P Diddy owned. I just thought it was it's a funny shirt too. It's just like a picture of a football. It's like, what? I don't know. I wouldn't want my wife wearing that, but no
It's
football shirts for you.
Ethan Hawke's athletic prowess.
Yeah, because he was a strong safety. Even in movies, no white cornerbacks. He had to be a safety.
That was a great side character. Was the ex-cop turned drug dealer that they smoked and stole all his money. He was good too.
Scott Glenn.
Yeah, he was good too.
Yeah, and I liked how he followed local high school football, and so he knew who the guy was. He's like, "Oh, I used to watch you play."
Yeah, he follows all the good players.
Yeah. Can you guys explain the snail joke to me?
No, I cannot. I even did some Googling to see like, is there an esoteric, reading of this, or like, is this from culture? And I couldn't get to the bottom of it.
I'll give my 2 cents. I think he's saying he and for context, this is when he was coming down from being high on some laced PCP or whatever.
Yeah.
When he's telling him this, and he's like busted a snail, and then the snail comes back around. I think he's saying like, "Hey man, if you get your ass kicked out here, just stay in the backyard. Just like don't come back around you don't want to be a part of this kind of thing." I think that's what he's trying to say.
Yeah. I think that's a very funny scene. Then Ethan Hawke's like talking about the smiles and the cries or whatever, and I don't know. I think it's pretty funny.
Yeah, there's a vicious debate on Quora about how to, and Reddit as well, actually, about how to interpret the joke. And Max's read was better and more efficient than any of those people. So
yeah, the PCP. I think Denzel's a good line. I think he said it's a man-sized hit you took, dog.
I didn't know you like to get wet, Jake. That's when you saw that scene, you're like, oh, this movie isn't like other movies. You're like, damn.
Did you guys in college, I mean, granted, I know that you're a more respectable sort of man than I am, but I know that when I was in college, if people took something or smoked something and then based on their own behavior or reaction, they thought, there was something in it that they weren't anticipating, like maybe a joint had Coke sprinkled on it or something, people would refer to that as getting training date.
No, I never heard that.
Okay.
That's funny.
Yeah, that was all pretty sinister how he set him up like that, because it's, I guess if you want to go to realism or whatever, they would pull his blood and urine after he shot that guy and they'd be like, oh, you're high on PCP in the course of a search warrant. You shot this guy, like, you're going to jail.
Yeah.
Like kind of how that would go.
So like, there's a practical question. Like the like narc cops who are, I guess, undercover, they like, I mean, do they have to use drugs or whatever? I mean, I guess
it's phrased in the directive that I remember was that you have to be in fear for your life, essentially. So, I mean, that's kind of subjective. So I would say, what this movie illustrates pretty well is that things can go off the rails pretty quickly with these units, and you can get, really off the path because there's no oversight. They just, if you're bringing in cases and closing them and doing a good job, they pat you on the back. And so if there's no oversight or anything, and that's how you end up like the gun trace task force in Baltimore, where they're like, oh, we're robbing drug dealers. We're doing the right thing. kind of thing, because they were all in their own little world, and no one was going to check them. No one. So
Yeah, I think so. I know nothing about undercover police work, obviously, but I am a spy memoir enthusiast, and I do think there's like weird incentives of living a double life that definitely encourage certain sorts of behavior. Like one thing that I've read in like at least 3 or 4 spy novels is like spy memoirs is the spy saying like there was an official rule, like in the MI6 or whatever. Like I remember one from a guy who was embedded with the IRA in particular, and he was saying like there was a rule that like spies in the IRA wouldn't shoot at British soldiers. And he's like, so I always shot at like British cops and stuff we would see because I knew to the people around me like that was total cover that like I just think it's an instance where the incentives are aligned as such that like the technical rule is going to get broken in every case because sort of like the constraints the individual is under is so severe that it is like I'm applying it back to the police thing. It's like, well, if you take this hit, you might lose your job in 6 months. And if you don't take it, someone might shoot you in the head. Like I suspect that always gets resolved one way. You know what I mean? And so I think with any undercover things, I think rules are like not really rules.
I knew an undercover guy that got shot during a drug deal gone bad, and he survived. He got shot in the head and he survived because what happened was he developed this relationship with some guys, and then they ripped him off before because fake drugs are a big thing, and he was telling them because he knew. It was like, I think it was PCP he was trying to buy, and he was like, yo, this ain't good, this doesn't smell, it has a very distinct odor. And then they were like, oh, you fucked up. And then they shot him several times. He was lucky enough to dodge, and then everybody kind of descended on that, and then the guys involved got taken out. But it's a very, but that is very uncommon, and I think after that they kind of changed policies and things like that to make it harder for incidents like that to occur. So I'm sure it's not like the Wild West probably like in the 70s anymore in that regard. I imagine probably most undercover cops were very corrupt back then, but now there definitely is more oversight now than there was before, for sure.
I'm certainly like, I find the allure of it. I mean, there's an allure, right? Like I'm somewhat sympathetic to Alonzo. Like, oh, I can rip off bad guys. I can take their money. I can resell their drugs or whatever. Like, I kind of get it. I mean, I don't like, I'm not the kind of person that would ever follow through with anything like that, but I'm at least in a narrative, I'm like sympathetic to watching them do that. Or when I hear about it in real life, like the cops who did it, I'm sort of like, well, I get it. I get why they did it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely America has a weird relationship with the police and always has, in terms of the police are kind of worshipped in popular culture, television, and movies and all that sort of thing. And then, the use of force incidents and the relationship with the police and the press obviously have never been worse now. But it is kind of that Jekyll and Hyde phenomenon culturally with it, because and it's a unique profession in that it's a reflection on all police, what one officer does. So not that generalizations don't come out of different incidents, but I think that's the weird kind of dynamic going on with American police.
Yeah, how would Alonzo have handled George Floyd?
He definitely would have been marching. Those people are always good at like seizing opportune moments. I think, like, we're watching this Fannie Willis testimony today. She seems like she's got some Alonzo in her. She's talking about 50 big and being loose off the goose. I think, like, I guess I wanted to ask Max, because I agree with you, Granite. Like, whenever I watch corrupt cop movies, I always sort of think, I mean, I have a very, like, basic attitude towards this stuff, but I always think, like, yeah, aren't the police just supposed to be, like, the most effective, most well-armed gang? Like, I don't really care. I don't care about the rights of criminals that much or whatever. But I think the distinction is, or what's sort of unique about this character is, like, there's a lot of movies, and The Shield is maybe a show where the protagonist transition from one setting to the other is, like, there are shows where corrupt cops are planting evidence and roughing up criminals, and not following the rules, but essentially they're being corrupt to be better at their jobs, like to put more criminals away. And to me, that's very easy as a citizen to, like, hear about and not be particularly concerned about. But I think part of what this movie and The Shield both capture is, like, it's extremely likely, if you're sort of living above the law in that way, that you might eventually also be like, well, why don't I just sell the drugs? You might expand from using your feeling of being above the rules yourself to just take down criminals, to actually be like, oh, I want to get in on the action, because I'm, like, this very powerful, assertive, violent person, and, like, the state doesn't pay me nearly enough for the service I provide, so I'll get in on this. But I guess what I'm just saying, like, criminality waged against criminals versus criminality waged against the public, which I would include, like, selling drugs in, those are sort of distinct in my mind. And Alonzo is certainly a character that does both. So I think I'm sort of agreeing with you, Granted, but just saying, like, there are things Alonzo does where, like, it's not just that he wants to be effective. Like, he's engaged in a project totally, like, perpendicular to policing. By the end, he's just sort of, he needs $1 million to pay off the Russians or whatever. It's like,
yeah. And the Russians, I feel like the Russians is the Russians come up at the 59-minute mark when he's at the when he's at the nice restaurant with those, like, the leadership class of law enforcement. And I feel like the Russians are kind of where the movie, it's kind of the weak spot of the movie for me. Like, I would have rather not had this, like, threat, this invisible threat of the Russians coming. I would, that's kind of where the ending, I don't feel like, is as good as it could be. I would rather it just kind of all be within the characters that we're with.
I like it as a sort of MacGuffin, because it's like, what they need to accomplish, I think, just from, like, a story perspective, is that, like, Alonzo is completely in control of his environment, and, like, the criminals are stupider than him, so he's always one step ahead. But, like, you have to make him mortal without disrupting that King Kong persona, to use language from the movie. So I think it's sort of effective to be like, oh, Alonzo is the undisputed king on, like, this 12 blocks or whatever, and it's, like, a small enough pool that because part of the question is, like, how has this guy survived? And then you see him being sort of one step ahead of everybody else. Even Roger, his old friend, like, can't really anticipate that he's actually going to kill him. So I think it's effective story-wise to just be like, oh, there's this criminal organization that we don't have any, knowledge of in the movie, that just exists outside of the scope of the movie. And Alonzo crossed them when he was out of town. So, like, now he's dealing with something he doesn't understand. I can see how that's a little bit like Deus Ex Machina bullshit. But I think if it had just been, say, like, because it is a little confusing watching the movie, like, why don't the Bloods just, like, kill him in the apartment complex? Like that seems like it'd be a little more efficient. Like Ethan Hawke leaves and the guy's just like, Terry Crews beats him to death or whatever. But I
Yeah.
kind of like, I don't know. I think the Russian thing works okay for me anyway.
I kind of like the mystery about it because they said that he beat the guy to death, right? When he was, and I'm assuming alcohol was involved due to how much he's drinking throughout the movie, and he has a temper and that kind of thing. So it kind of tells a little bit more about his character. And it's kind of like he does have this urgency in the movie when you're watching it again, that kind of like he's calling in all the favors. He's pulling out all the stops because this is it. And like this is the one time his ass is on the line in this case.
Yeah,
so,
that's the other thing. The movie needs to explain why he's exposing Jake to so much so fast. And so like there has to be some trap that's springing on Alonzo that's making him be even more aggressive than he would be normally. And I think if you make that something from his own environment, that might make him look weaker than the movie wants to set him up as. I don't know.
Yeah, you touched on something that I had in my notes about how, and maybe this is part of my problem with the ending, is that Alonzo always feels so in control, and then towards the end he's flailing. And I have that in my notes about like it's that immediate shift from being in control to suddenly looking like lost or something, which it's fine. I just for whatever reason that's like kind of what I didn't vibe with for the ending.
Well, one of the reasons, like if you were writing a story, one of the things you might say is that like the way Alonzo control, like the way you would justify that dramatic shift in his level of ability to project power on his environment is you would say like Jake is uniquely invulnerable to corruption. Like not completely as we see, but in other words, like the way Alonzo controls people, controls the other guys in his unit, is he like implicates them in things and makes sure some of the shit is going to roll downhill and end up on them, and then everybody folds. And so like what he actually can't wield control over is like a righteous man or whatever. So that's the encounter that sort of changes his nature.
Yeah, that's good. That's better than how I was thinking about it.
No, but I think I would also say like thematic things like that are supposed to be intuitive. So to the extent that like an interested viewer doesn't just naturally sort of take that on, then like maybe the movie is doing something wrong. Like, that's how I would justify it. But, whether it's effective is sort of in the hands of the audience.
I want to go back to the the part with Snoop Dogg. So I think we got Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre in this movie. I'm trying to remember. Is there any other rappers that make appearances? Snoop is pretty good as like in his little role. Dr. Dre not as much, but Snoop, they roll up to him. They're like Ethan Hawke clumsily tries to buy drugs, even though like Snoop presumably knows Alonzo already. So it's like, I mean, so it's just Alonzo setting him up. But I had a question for you guys. They chase him down, like, and why is maybe it's just for dramatic effect, but why is Alonzo taking rounds out of his gun? Like he's just doing his counting thing, but it seems like do you want rounds rolling around?
That was a silly part. It was for dramatic effect, but remember the line where he says you get a year for each bullet?
Yeah.
But the law is, and it's a federal law, that a prohibited person possessing a firearm, so a convicted felon, it's a mandatory 5, whether it be California or New Hampshire or Florida, so it would have sufficed to be like, hey, I got this gun charge on you, you're screwed unless you cooperate. But kind of the, you get a year for each bullet is kind of nonsense. But I'm sure, cops use that kind of language to intimidate for dramatic effect themselves, so it's not exactly inappropriate. But that's speaking legally. That's not accurate.
Do you get pretty theatrical cops who like to say like who do like little silly little things?
Yeah, I would say. Let me break it down. I would say probably 30% of the police are like people really passionate about it, mean well, join for the right reasons. Probably another 30% are like totally useless people who just want to collect a paycheck, and the remainder is a different mix, but of people. But there's definitely the percentage that join because they watch too much TV, kind of thing, and they there is one of the libs' accurate criticisms, I would say, about the profession is that it does attract narcissists to a certain extent. Yeah. So, which is kind of necessary because it takes a special kind of person to tell a grown man twice your size what to do. But if you can't do that, you're not going to make it. So you have to. But that's typically associated with like narcissism or bravado, kind of thing. So yeah, there's like the corny, there's the corny cops for sure, and the ones you're kind of uncomfortable working with because they have that ego.
I mean, it's kind of like brain surgeons too. Like you have to be sort of, you have to be pretty confident. Oh, and it's often going to manifest as overconfident to feel comfortable like cutting into someone's brain or something. So similar thing. Like you kind of need those people
for sure.
Yeah, funny thing in my hometown, and I support the cops in doing this. I support all lies to the public, but
back to blue, thin blue line. Yeah. We're all about that hearing.
Just a funny dynamic was there was like a rumor that there was a curfew in our town for people under 18. And whenever you'd see a cop, you'd be like, if you'd be at Mobile and a cop is filling up gas next to you, as a high schooler, you just be like, hey, officer, can I ask you something? And they'd say, sure, kid. And you'd be like, is there really a curfew in this town? And the cop would like, put their hands up on their vest like they do and be like, listen, all I can tell you is you should be home by dark. And it's like, it just became like this massive meme that they would never answer the fucking question. And like, it is just kind of funny. And someone eventually went to town hall and like looked at the records, and there's no curfew, but it was just something they'd used, I think, in dealing with our high school for like decades and decades. They'd just like pull up on you, flash their lights at you and be like, curfew, get off the streets. And like, it never existed, but it was an effective rhetorical tool or whatever. And they were very good at like, no one would break. Like you'd even see like someone you knew was a cop at like a church barbecue. You just be like, now that we're alone, like, is there a fucking curfew? And they'd be like, don't worry about
it. There actually is curfews in places like DC and Baltimore City, depending on how wild a particular summer is getting. But those laws are fairly ineffective, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, how well does a given cop even know the law?
Definitely varies by department for sure. I would say, if somebody works a very active beat, they have to.
Yeah.
And it's necessary, but then there's a lot of positions where people are spending 90% of their time sitting in their cruiser eating donuts, so they probably don't know much at all. It depends on the shift. Depends on the location. But if you don't, like the people that join typically that want to do work go to the busy beats because they want to climb the ranks and do cool stuff. So there's kind of like a natural diffusion in different police departments like that too. And it's, police departments hire the chick that's 5'1", 100 pounds, soaking wet, and then they stick her in a beat where she's going to be herding goats. That stuff happens all the time because, she's not going to be of any use in a street fight. So, there's hiring practices, then there's the practical application on the street. right? So
Yeah. I wanted to go back to the when they visit. It's Roger, right? And played by Scott Glenn.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys picked up on this, but he plans to go to the Philippines when he retires. I just thought that was funny. Like he's gonna go. He's gonna go get him some nice young Filipinos.
I feel like 3 million is too much for the Philippines. You can shoot higher if you've got 3 million under your floor.
Yeah.
yeah, they
So
could
yeah,
have they could have done a movie about him. He seemed very interesting. His path and his how he ended up
well,
there.
he's great, and that guy, that actor, he was kind of a bigger star in the '80s. He was sort of anticipated to have a bigger career than he did, but anyway, he's a passport bro, I guess.
Oh, before I forget, there was one big oversight I wanted to mention. Do you guys remember the scene, uh, the when Alonzo sticks him with the Jolos near the end, and they're like, "Oh, what kind of gun you got, man?" You know,
Yeah,
and then he's just like, doesn't he just hand over his gun like, "Oh yeah, check it out," or whatever?
He
I think.
takes the clip and the bullet out, but he does ultimately give it to them. Yeah.
Well, it's like, dude, you.
You
I don't
never do
know
that.
that. I mean, if you get killed in a bathtub, I mean, that was the wrong move, and like I can kind of understand why they murdered you in that circumstance.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the Cholo poker game. Um, that's one of the funniest parts of the movie. It's like a good scene. It's like tense, um, but it's also like that guy Cliff Curtis. He's Maori. He doesn't sound like a Mexican at all. Um, and he's not Mexican. He's from New Zealand. And then why are they talking to him? I mean, okay, so there's the guy from Breaking Bad in there, Tuco Salamanca, and he's like the exact same character that he is in Breaking Bad. Um, but why are they talking to like? Why are they all like bragging about how they've been raped?
I think
I
they
think they're just trying to scare him in various ways.
Yeah,
or they're saying, cops put me in jail, and then I got raped in jail, so I got beef against cops. Is what they're trying
yeah.
to say, probably. The one guy, the New Zealand guy, was he the guy yelling different stuff?
He's the big mustache guy, the main, like he's kind of like
Oh
the
yeah.
boss cholo.
Okay. Yeah.
If you go back and watch it, if you know that he's not actually American or even Mexican or Mexican American, you can totally tell that he doesn't know what to do with his voice.
Yeah, that's a phony accent. I remember it now.
And I don't get why they Hollywood used to give him a lot of these sort of roles. I don't really. I mean, there's like no shortage of Mexican guys. So
He's a big dude though, so you probably cast him for certain roles because of that, I imagine.
yeah,
That was kind of like Deus Ex Machina when they find his niece's wallet when they're like, "Oh, get his stuff before we kill him," and then they find.
yeah. That's like I mean, I thought that was a nice like way to bring the movie together, but it's also sort
It
of
was
like
kind of a because like you were saying earlier, Alonzo's got the sophisticated plan, and it kind of starts going sideways. But it would have been fine if they just murdered him and were done with it. But that
yeah,
I guess it was kind of signaling like, oh, Jake was doing the right thing, and doing the right thing pays off in the end because people will take that in consideration whether they're going to murder you or not. Is probably not. It's probably the overarching message, I would say.
yeah, and that the scene where he gets that wallet is funny. Again, it's kind of funny because it's a black and white duo of homeless guys. Like, they never want to just have like two black guys or two white guys or whatever. It's always kind of going to be a mix. But then I thought it's funny too how he uses like the forbidden chokehold, and Alonzo's like, "Oh, I saw you use that chokehold," and then 20 years later, uh, forbidden chokeholds would become a pretty big public discourse.
Yeah, there's there's deadly force, which is, force likely to end someone's life, like shooting them, obviously. But yeah, that's chokeholds are generally considered deadly force since you could crush somebody's windpipe or something like that.
Yeah.
Even though if you're a good MMA guy, there shouldn't be any problems, but you know how that goes. The amount of beating Jake takes in this movie is legendary. Like,
Yeah, it's way too high for 24 hours.
let's see, he gets his ass kicked. He No, that's after he smokes the PCP. That probably take a lot out of you. And he falls on the car when he's like chasing down Alonzo in the end. Yeah, he took a beating.
Yeah.
Oh, how about we talk about when they were like shooting the one guy in their unit to like set up the scene to make it seem legit. Like they shot him through the
Yeah.
vest. That was pretty.
Yeah. So, I don't know if you've ever been like, have you been shot at or shot even with wearing something protective? Like, what is that? How realistic is it to like just be like, oh, I'm just going to shoot this guy here, even though he's wearing a vest. I'm going to shoot him, and he's going to be okay. Like, is that pretty
That's.
reliable? Or
I mean, I would not be surprised if a bullet would slip through. It's kind of like it's nice to have plates, but they're not foolproof, especially depending on what kind of round you're getting shot at with
yeah,
that kind of thing. So that's not. I would not be comfortable saying, "Hey, shoot me in the vest." It'd be funny. It'd be a cool TikTok video.
yeah. And movies are always like that. They treat something like body armor like it just works. Like, but it's in real life. There's degrees of just there is failure. It can fail.
Yeah, sure.
Well, can I ask you guys a lame like religious question about this movie?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think there is like this. It's funny actually, apropos of nothing. So last night I was at Ash Wednesday Mass, and there was some crazy shooting in DC. There was like a guy who was being brought up on charges for animal abuse, and he barricaded himself in his house or something, and he shot several cops. And the cops were at the hospital, and my priest apparently went over there and was ministering to them, and he told in his homily this funny scene. Sort of, to me, I related much more to the cop. He said he was holding the cop's hand, and the cop said, nothing's ever going to get better, Father. Like, having just been like gut shot by this insane person on Ash Wednesday, and the priest was like, no, like, you have to believe. But there is this thing in Christianity. I know it's in Catholicism. I think it's in Orthodoxy too, where it's like, it's almost like if there was any one like 100% righteous person, they would almost have like this disabling effect on like the sinners around them. But it's sort of everybody's willingness to compromise a little bit or to sin a little bit that allows the world to like spin into corruption. And so the movie is obviously not like explicitly Christian, but I do like these sort of morality tales. It's just related to what I was saying earlier, that it's sort of like the reason that Alonzo cannot conquer Jake is because of, in some sense, like Jake's innocence. Like he doesn't have enough dirt on him for Alonzo to really get his hooks in or to get purchase or whatever. And I always feel like modern movies that are not like explicitly religious in a way that would alienate viewers, but also like touch on these universal or ancient themes in a way, are always like much more effective storytelling, because there's something sort of deep they're getting at. But so I guess I was wondering, like, did the movie, the first question was, does the movie speak to you in that way, or am I just an annoying Catholic reading Christianity into everything? And then second, like, do you think that's actually true? Do you think there are people in the world who are sort of so good that if they go into a situation where everybody's sort of fucking up, just by like remaining righteous, they can sort of set things right. Like I would like to sort of believe in that scenario, but I don't know if I've ever encountered it.
I think it's tough because people who put themselves out there as like no, I'm going to follow the rules. I'm going to be the good guy. They are often, so they're often just like, you just get rid of them as fast as you can. Right. If you're like Alonzo, you just get rid of those guys. And so like, yeah, they do like improve things around them. There's like an outward growth of like positivity from them, but generally people just try and get rid of those people. So yeah, I don't know. And it's also the whole thing with like, there's like the governance thing, like some countries and stuff like don't really seem to have these problems like with their cops. Like, like sometimes I'll watch like these like Scandinavian shows like on streaming services or whatever, because they like to import like a bunch of cheaper like entertainment from Europe or something. And like the crooked cop in like a Norwegian or Swedish show, like they'll be like 1/10 of like what Alonzo's up to. Like
they're getting free haddock from the
they're like
maiden.
Yeah, they're like barely doing anything, and it's like this huge deal. I don't know. It comes down to this like culture thing, I guess. And I mean, Training Day is obviously like this big. It's obviously like this huge multicultural thing where like people barely share languages. They definitely don't share like religion or like exact. I mean, they're all like vaguely. Everyone in the movie is probably vaguely Christian or something, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is like this kind of corruption probably is really easier to. I'll say it's easier to pull off in like a multicultural setting. Maybe not, because I mean, you get completely corrupt places all around the world who are a lot less diverse than Los Angeles. But I don't know.
I would say generally the lower strata of society, even if they're like the biggest problem with corruption in police in the United States and probably Mexico for that matter, is like the lower strata. If the cops do something, they're not going to go to the cops to tell on the other cops. Because I think there's been, especially there has been incidents like this in the United States in like very poor, backwards areas. I remember taking a course in college, and they went over how New Orleans Police Department was the most corrupt police department in North America, and they murdered people who complained on them for victimizing them. So it is just kind of like the police department is going to reflect generally the population of the area it serves, right? So it's kind of, you can come in and be a white knight, but it's the institution is going to have way more baggage than you can overcome usually. Like there obviously is great men that can overcome any circumstance, but it's very difficult coming into an institution as an outsider.
I know I think it is the case, we're all right wing here or whatever, but like I don't think corruption is actually a stable concept of like, because sort of in political science and development, it's thought of as like a sign that institutions aren't functioning. But there are definitely a lot of parts of the world where like payouts for low-level bureaucrats are actually how institutions do function. And there are even like, international programs and stuff now. Like I think I read about something in India where like rather than trying to stop police from like bribing people or extorting people for bribes in this rural province, they were actually just trying to set the rates of the bribe consistently so that people wouldn't. And that example sort of does bring home like, not that I'm a total relativist, but it's like if there are these places where the expectations of the public and the institution is that some amount of that like certain kind of interactions involve a payment, like who really cares? Like I do actually think Anglos, like the type of people that founded America, are much more outraged by that sort of thing than is the global norm. And like I'm happy to live in a country like that. But I don't know that it's, it's just another aspect of like our way of life that we've pretended is universal and are trying to export, on different communities, both domestically and abroad. And like for some people it just doesn't make sense. But yeah, I don't know. It's there are like interesting things in this movie. I would be curious to know in the script what race Jake's wife was, because they're Alonzo and Jake are sort of like, you could do a very like libtard reading of this movie where it's like Jake is the type of person you could put a liberal lens on this movie and be like Jake is what you need in like a multi-ethnic society where like people are bustling up against each other and you have to be like open and very responsible. And Alonzo just like, has a Dominican mistress and kills everyone. Seems like an archetype you see more in contemporary America, but there are some Jakes out there too, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of why, like, the idea of sort of normalized corruption. That's why I was saying I was somewhat sympathetic to the idea of like corrupt cops, because it's like, oh well, maybe they just have an incentive, and as long as what their incentive to like do police work, and as long as what they're doing isn't, as long as they're not like cultivating new crime or like allowing certain crime to flourish or something, like the mob or something, which I guess inevitably they might end up just doing. But yeah, as long as they weren't like creating new crime, they were just sort of like stealing from the existing stock of criminals. Although I get that systems don't work this way. Like new things start outgrowing from the behavior of the cops. But yeah, that's why I was saying I was a bit sympathetic to the idea of a corrupt cop.
Yeah, and I do think people who research systems and stuff, Eric Weinstein used to have this take that was like members of Congress should be making like tens of millions of dollars, because if you have people who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars who decide on laws with like massive economic implications, like the only way to make them not corrupt is to have them already be rich. And
Yeah.
I do think with the drug war, there is this weird incentive thing where like it makes sense to pay a cop 60 grand if he's patrolling a town and like maybe once in his career someone will try to run him over. But if he's going to bust drug dealers who are going to try to kill him, who are handling millions of dollars, maybe that, I don't know, Max, you can tell me what's realistic, but like if that's an event that could happen a few times in a cop's career, then like the incentives related to the wage start to not make sense. Like in general, there aren't that many jobs where you have close physical proximity to millions and millions of dollars, but you never get any of it. That's just like a weird incentives things. I mean, I guess like janitors have banks have janitors and they don't get paid 200 grand, but there's something going on there.
Yeah, I would say in terms of like payment salary for cops and everything, there was a lot of policy suggestions introduced by the libtards in like 2020 of how to fix the police. How do we fix the police? And obviously, open communists just say abolish the police, which, whatever. But, even the people who were trying to reformists, most of their policy prescriptions were just nonsense, such as, oh, end qualified immunity, and that didn't even happen. And now you just have this chilling effect where the cops don't do their job and you're seeing crime go out of control, because that's what they didn't realize is the whole system was built on trust, and that's gone. That the bureaucrats, judges, prosecutors wouldn't come after the cops unless they did very erroneous corruption. But now, if you think that now is bad, imagine this kind of new system would be implemented where, oh, the police are, have to pay for insurance, and your insurance based on your beat. So then the incentives become even more bizarre of why would I work in
It's a bad neighborhood.
South side
Yeah.
of Chicago, exposing myself, where people just joined the police for the excitement. It was okay for the danger as long as the incentives were correct for, the prestige, the glory, the excitement, and all of that. But all of those have kind of evaporated with the hostility within local, state, city governments and federal governments. So, what this movie kind of made me think of, which I don't think it's exactly appropriate, is kind of the state of exception kind of thing. Because I really like the atmospheric thing going on with Los Angeles and the shots of them driving around. But it was kind of like hostile territory, right? And it's kind of like you're tasked with this job of overseeing this massive city with this extremely diverse population, all these languages and everything. But you're facing more of a counterinsurgency situation than a policing situation.
Yeah.
And I think that probably has something to do with the corruption, seeing as how, like, I don't want it to get as bad as Mexico, but that's kind of like where the general direction we're heading. But in Mexico, it's such a dangerous situation being a police officer in general, where you could be murdered for, saying the wrong thing or seeing the wrong thing, that the incentives become totally backwards. And now the public knows that the police are corrupt because they want to be alive, right? They don't want the cartel to murder them or their family. So there's, like, maybe not as much distrust towards the police as the cartel, but it's pretty close there. So I
Mhm.
think that's the state of exception thing is kind of like what Yarvin talks about in terms of, raising a telephone pole up. It takes a lot of energy to get it up in the air, right? But then you can hold it in the air with one hand if you were, in a cherry picker or something. So it's kind of that, is this a police situation? Is it a counterinsurgency? Is this a state of emergency? How bad does it have to get for martial law or something like that to be implemented, right?
I'm gonna move on to like just my note dump section, and you guys can feel free to throw in anything you just thought, anything we didn't really get to. I'm gonna try and wrap it up here in a minute, but I don't know if you guys knew, but they made a TV show. It aired a couple years ago. They tried to adapt this to TV. They did one season. I watched the pilot. It was not very good, and
Who
does not
who were
capture
the
the
who were the stars of the TV version?
the bad guy, the bad cop. And it's like it takes place after Training Day. Like they kind of reference the movie in the pilot, but the bad cop is Bill Paxton, so he's white, and the trainee is a black guy. So they switched the races there with the good and the bad cop. And I think in the show the bad cop has maybe a little bit more of a heart of gold. I mean, I only watched the pilot, but it implies that he's like a little more complicated than Alonzo. But it doesn't capture the energy of the show at all. It was like CBS slop. Like it was not very good. Denzel got an Oscar for this. I don't know if we mentioned that, but he's not really the lead in a sense. It's kind of, I mean, Ethan Hunt's kind of the lead, but Denzel got a leading actor Oscar. Samuel L. Jackson and Matt Damon were originally cast as the cop and the trainee, or as the trainee and the trainer. Eminem at one time was up for the role of Jake, and Bruce Willis at one time was considered for the Alonzo role. Like it was not written that it was like a black cop and a white trainee. That's just how they ultimately cast it. But they were kind of open to anything.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's kind of based on a real guy. I think his name's Rafael Perez. I think. Yeah, and this guy's interesting. He kind of looks black. I mean, he's Puerto Rican, but he could pass as like an African American. Yeah, he did some of the stuff that Alonzo does in the movie, and he was also like involved or allegedly, Biggie Smalls' family alleges that Rafael Perez was involved in Biggie's murder.
Yeah, it's always crazy to me. I mean, there's a number of conspiracies I take interest in, but also ones I don't. And there's this whole other world of sort of like black/Hotep conspiracies. And I know that the sort of LAPD killed Biggie and Tupac has been floating around for like decades. I guess conspiracies never really get put to bed, but it seems like every couple of years, like a new book or a new piece of evidence comes out related to that.
Yeah, and they claim this Perez guy was like the guy, I guess, who was like on the scene or something, who did it. But I think I already mentioned they had like real gang members involved in the making. One of the black guy that they talked to the most. Well, I'm trying to remember which guy. Anyway, there's a bunch of like guys with real gang experience in the movie. There's apparently a prequel in development called Training Day, Day of the Riot, which I assume is about Rodney King, which I'd actually be pretty interested in a really good Rodney King movie.
There's a good book I read. I was never really a big into cop books or movies that much, even when I was in it, because you don't really want to tune into that and it's your life. But there's a really good book, The New Centurions, and it was about the chaos of the Rodney King riots and all of that. And that was definitely gave like Wild West No Rules vibes. Very, very good one.
Nice. That's about it for me. I don't think I have any other cool notes.
I had a note about how they framed the whole scene where they raid the house for the money and they split it up, and there's like talks about, and Jake pulls the shotgun on Alonzo. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in that scene and a lot of good cinematography, but that was it was definitely like you saw some pretty wild stuff before that scene, but then you pretty much realized as the viewer, and Jake did, like, this is the point of no return. Like, they're literally murdering people, they're doing burglaries, they're framing evidence. They shot the guy in the vest and one went through so that, it would look more legit, quote unquote.
Yeah. That's a great scene too. I mean, it's incredibly tense. It's good, action.
Yeah, and I think it's very cool getting into all my like deep thematic stuff. I think it's very cool when Jake, or it's like an important moment when Jake gets the shotgun from him and is sort of like very clearly willing to die just to like assert himself to Alonzo in that moment. And Alonzo sort of respecting it and understanding Jake in a way that the other guys don't. Like, I forget his exact line, but they're like, yo, this guy's crazy. And he's like, no, he's just like a guy. He's like somehow sort of a tough guy, but also has a heart of gold, or he has some phrase like that. That seems like
I think he said he had a little freak out. We all been there or something, because, these guys do some wild stuff.
Yeah, but Alonzo says something like complimentary about sort of Jake's heart or something. And I don't know, that whole part's really good. I wanted to ask you guys, sorry, go ahead.
Alonzo is really good at manipulation. You see, he plays that kind of, I'm insulting you, and then I'm going to build you up, and then I'm going to break you down. That's just manipulation 101, like abusive, professional, or like a romantic relationship, kind of thing.
That's the part of manipulation that I'm not good at. I'm not good at the part where I'm like really mean, so that they are happy, so that they like feel blessed and beloved when I'm nice. Like I never got the mean part down.
That's okay, granted. That's
but I feel like I need to
you just have to be with other totally secure alpha males like me and Max, so it all works.
Yeah, but I want to get to the next level too in life. I need to get rich. I'm kind of tired of being poor.
Yeah, I certainly get that part. I wanted to ask, did you guys think it was weird that like I already talked about how the preference cascade and how everybody sort of thinks Alonzo is an asshole. But did you guys think it's weird that like they basically show Alonzo's mistress and son like sort of tacitly siding with Jake in the shootout, or like implicitly like trusting him more? Like, that struck me as a little weird this time, but maybe the implication is like, yeah, but Alonzo just manipulates people. He doesn't have real relationships with anyone. so everybody's like ready to run away from him. But
I found the last scene where the guys have his back more. I thought that was the best part of the end was when they were like, bounce out of here, we got it. And not necessarily is like that realistic, but it was definitely more realistic than a lot of the other stuff, because they were like, dude, we're done with this guy's shit. And they didn't even have to kill him because they knew he's a dead man walking. So like they just had to grab the gun and be like, hey, it's over, you're done. So
Yeah.
I really like that.
Go ahead and bounce, homie. We got your back.
Because they knew, like, I remember even the opening scene where he comes in there, they're definitely look at him like, oh god, this guy again. So there's definitely a lot of baggage there with those guys.
Yeah, they captured well, and I've seen this in like work settings, obviously, in like not with violence, but like there is a weird thing when someone simultaneously demands respect and deference, but is sort of hated. Like there are bosses like that where like when they walk in, people will groan, but then they'll grovel or bow their head or whatever. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah. I have to go. I think I need to go unlock the door for someone. But remember, to protect the sheep, it takes a wolf to catch a wolf.
So true.
All right, thanks. Thank you guys for joining. Sorry I had to cut it off kind of abruptly, but go check out WBS Apparel. Check out Degree Studies Podcast. I'll put a link in there. Thank you guys for joining.
Thanks, guys. It was fun.
Always a pleasure.
All right, we'll see you.
Take care.